This is Corbin, the Awkward GM, and welcome to Beyond D&D. Today we will be discussing Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Trust Mummified Time Lords. I'd put Dr. Hugh music here, but that would require me to actually put music in these videos and to deal with the BBC copyright lawyers. If you are interested in playing a tabletop RPG, please consider hiring Warlock Sanctum Games. They are professional game masters who run a variety of games. Currently, they are running Blades in the Dark, Mage the Awakening, and Vampire the Requiem. I'll post their available times and links in the description. Mummy the Curse is a standalone RPG in the Chronicles of Darkness setting, which centers around people of an ancient kingdom who were transformed into powerful immortal beings in service to higher beings, while at the same time being able to time travel. Content warning: Mummy the Curse deals with the subject of memory loss and may not be for everyone. I will only be covering Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition. I'm not familiar with 1st Edition or the old World of Darkness gameline version, Mummy the Resurrection, at all. The Arisen, also known as mummies, were once citizens of the Nameless Empire. Priests mummified you in the name of a powerful godlike being called a judge, which granted you immense power and immortality at the cost of your memories. However, mummies don't experience time in a linear fashion. For instance, a mummy awakening in the 1940s may have memories of a previous awakening that occurred in the 1980s. As such, a key aspect of the game revolves around Arisen trying to figure out what the judges want them to do, and sort through their slowly returning memories before they fall back into hibernation. The main defining feature of Arisen is how difficult they are to defeat. If they die, they'll immediately come back to life, reform from one of their removed organs, or reincarnate into one of their cultists. While all Arisen originally were born human in the Nameless Kingdom, not all still have the same face as they did before. So an Arisen may look white, black, Asian, Middle Eastern, etc., but they all come from the Nameless Empire originally. When a mummy runs out of power, they are brought to their version of the underworld, called Duat. This allows them to regain the fuel to power their magic, which is known as Sikhem. When they fully fuel up, they awaken. But time has no meaning in Duat, and when they return to the mortal world, they could be dropped almost anywhere or when. But as they experience the real world, their Sikhem will drop, unless they can refill it from Sikhem in relics or vestiges. A freshly awakened mummy can bring down godlike powers onto their enemies, but as they remain active, that power begins to dwindle until they fall back asleep to await another day they are needed by their judge. Mummies originally came from the Nameless Kingdom, which would later be called Irem, or False Paradise. This pre-Egyptian society was the apex of science and magic, and its ruins would later turn into the ancient Egypt that we know from history. Led by sorcerer priests called Shan-Iatu, the Nameless Kingdom prospered. At some point, they created the Arisen through the Right of Return, an act that defied the judges, powerful godlike beings that the sorcerer priests served. The judges ruled over the afterlife known as Duat, and determined which souls can move on to Aru, which is an equivalent to heaven. When the first Arisen awoke, they discovered that the sorcerer priests had disappeared and that the Nameless Kingdom was lost to history. Merits are groups of Arisen that ally themselves together, usually for a greater cause. This allows them to descend together and arise at the same time. Even without their full memory, they immediately know they share a powerful camaraderie with each other. Judges do not directly interact with the Arisen. Even though judges have tasks for them, mummies will forget the task as soon as they arise. However, mummies can feel the pull of the judge's will pointing them into the direction of their mission, and completing it will reward them with Sikhem to stay active. However, this can be a balancing act, as the judge's goal may be in opposition to the mummy's personal goals. This is called the descent, and as an Arisen fails to complete the judge's mission, their Sikhem will lower till they return to slumber, and then go back to Duat. If mummies completely finish their goal, there is no reason to keep them active, and they will eventually return to Duat. Sometimes mummies are abandoned or leave the service of their judge if they rebel or do a mediocre job. This is usually a terrible fate for the Arisen, but does allow them to have more freedom at the cost of losing the judge's power to help them. I won't go over this state much, but know that there are rules to play these types of mummies. Most mummies have cults that take care of them when they are asleep. Rarely can cults date their lineages back to the time of the Nameless Kingdom. Most cults are formed by Arisen throughout their travels. If a cult is killed off, sometimes others will take up the mantle when they discover an Arisen's tomb. Mortals are the core of the cult. They are still tied to the mortal world and are great assets to have. Sorcerers are mortals who have mastered certain rites in order to utilize the power of their Arisen. The downside is that they usually have to cut themselves off from normal society in order to learn these abilities. Sadiq are half-alive people who act as the Arisen's personal bodyguards. There is only ever one per mummy according to the rite of the Engraved Heart ability. They can be resurrected, but they only experience time linearly, so they don't have the memories of previous awakenings if they take place after the current time period. So if they awaken in 1940s, they won't remember the 1980s. When mummies are asleep, they reside in tombs which are cared for by their cults, and typically have traps and guardians to protect them. They also act as storage for precious relics that the mummy has collected over the years. These tombs can range from ancient burial grounds to modern mansions, and will often act as a mummy's headquarters during their awakening. If the mummy is disturbed, they often take matters into their own hand and kill the intruder without question. The book talks about cults finding their slumbering mummy cradling a dead body in their sarcophagus. Mummies can be awoken for a multitude of reasons. The biggest one is the Sothic turn, which occurs every 1,460 years. The last one was in 2012 and resulted in a lot of Arisen waking up at once to find themselves in museums, laboratories, and private art collections. Those Arisen already active spent a lot of time trying to cover up what happened. Cults can also call upon the Arisen if they can collect enough Sekhem to fuel the awakening, and if they are able to get the attention of the Arisen's judge through rituals. Sometimes mummies will be awoken when people disturb their tomb, but this isn't always the case. An example in the book shows a mummy being dug up and accidentally stabbed with a shovel, and even then that didn't wake it up. So what constitutes disturbance varies, and it's not unheard of for cults to randomly find dead bodies laying next to their leader. Rarely, cults may use the sarcophagus's text as part of awakening the mummy. This text was inscribed inside the mummy's sarcophagus as a way of awakening the mummy to a calm start. It's dangerous because it risks accidentally disturbing the Arisen while performing it. Completing the ritual brings with it a calm mummy. Not completing it, failing to use it, or performing it wrong will result in a bestial and dangerous awakening that will kill a lot of people. Nearby necromantic rituals and mass slaughter can also cause the Arisen to accidentally awaken, as this is how mummies were created in the first place. In many of these cases, it takes about a scene for the mummy to recollect themselves enough to not just slaughter everybody nearby. In many cases, a cult may prepare the Arisen's tomb for a rude awakening, making sure to keep the important cult members at a safe distance. In most cases, the cult might not even be aware of the awakening, resulting in a big surprise for anyone on janitorial duty down there. Now we finally get to the rules. Balance is what keeps mummies on the path the judges have laid out for them, a positive trait that reinforces their commitment to the Arisen condition. Burden is the weight they bear from their sacred duty, a negative trait that can cause them to get thrown off their mission. Touchstones are important people to the Arisen. Due to the nature of time for the mummies, these people often are Sadiq, the Arisen's supernatural bodyguards, witnesses, who are mortals who can supernaturally recognize the Arisen, and inheritors, which are mortal cultists affected by the rite of investment. Decrees are what the Arisen pronounced in front of the judges during their rite of return. Each is associated with a type of animal, such as jackal, falcon, lion, bull, and serpent. Guilds were present during the Nameless Kingdom, each one representing a specialized area of ritualistic magic. They are each associated with a profession, such as spies, alchemists, scholars, sages, and leadership roles. I'll go into more detail later in the video on these. Mummies swear fealty to one of the 42 judges of Duat, each one dealing with a different sin or concept. There are 7 who are prominent within Arisen culture. Please forgive me for the pronunciation of these names. Kahibet, the judge against mass slaughter. Arem Abuf, the judge against learning science and magic before humanity is ready. Kenemeti, the judge against desecration and blasphemy. Niha, the judge against deception and lies. Nehebeka, the judge against arrogance. Unem Besek, the judge against stealing of domain. And Usek Nemtet, the judge against immortality, including the Arisen. The 5 pillars are how strong a mummy is within a category of magic. Ab is heart, Ba is spirit, Ka is essence, Ren is name, and Shuat is shadow. They range from 0 to 5, and these are based on your character's soul. These are also used for certain abilities. Affinities are subtle abilities that Arisen have. An Arisen gets 4 affinities, 1 from their decree, 1 from their guild, 1 from their primary pillar, and 1 from anything as long as they have the requirements for it. Utterances are powerful abilities that can bring down entire plagues or cause massive damage. All Arisen start with the Dream of Dead Gods utterance and can pick 2 more. Sekem is how strong your character is. If awoken by a Sothic turn, astrological event, or judge, you start with 10 Sekem. If awoken by your cult, you start with 8 or 9. If awoken by disruption or necromantic acts, start with 7. Memory is how much your character remembers of their past. As this raises, they learn more about their life in the Nameless Kingdom and their previous descents, at the cost of how long it takes for them to resurrect. Almost every mummy is associated with one of the guilds of Erem. By being a part of these guilds, this allowed them to get enough prestige to allow them to be chosen by the sorcerer priests in order to become Arisen. Makep, the Shadow of Pillars, were the secret police of Erem. Mesen Nebu, born of gold, were the scientists and alchemists of Erem. Sesha Hebsu, testimony to ages, were the knowledge keepers of Erem. Su Menet, eulogy for souls, were the necromancers and morticians of Erem. Teth Abihi, spider of fate, were the architects of Erem. As a heads up, I talked to one of the developers on the Onyx Path Discord. Apparently the artist for the decrees thought mummies would be able to shift their heads into their decree animal. This isn't the case, but the designer Chris Allen loved it so much that he created an affinity power to give mummies the ability to give themselves animal heads on his Patreon. I'll post a link to it in the description. Ashem the Jackals, the Eldritch Decree of Shadow. They act as guardians, but also guides for the living and the dead. Deshret, the Falcons, the Dauntless Decree of Spirit. They are overachievers and act to motivate others around them to achieve their goals. Keru, the Lions, are Ardent Decree of the Heart. They are thrill seekers and are empathetic to the emotions of others. Neshrem, the Bulls, the Stalwart Decree of Essence. They are dependable and eternally loyal. Ushmem, the Serpents, the Cunning Decree of Nam. They are intellectuals and manipulators. Before I go on, I just want to say this book has a plethora and a myriad of different antagonists and creatures to use. I definitely suggest getting this book if you really like having a variety of enemy types. Amkata are made from spilled Sekem or rituals. They reside in twilight like ghosts, spirits, and angels. They are an amalgamation of creatures with their head, body, and limbs often not matching. Often they will create nests near sources of Sekem and cause the location to appear haunted or cursed. Shinkasen are the remnants of the people sacrificed to research the Rite of Return, and are commanded by the judge Amut. They are sometimes called Bane mummies and appear to retain their memories since the Rite of Return. Some are even converted Arisen who have accepted Amut as their judge. Not all judges are allies to the Arisen or even other judges. The judges sometimes manifest their power on the mortal plane through a Benebet, which is usually a person in a powerful position. They get access to some of a judge's power and can summon an avatar of the judge that's even more powerful. When a Benebet's mission is complete, they lose this power and sometimes go crazy as a result. Sorcerers are humans who have learned to use rites and manipulate Sekem. A sorcerer needs to fully immerse themselves in learning these powers, and as such, become detached from the rest of humanity. They can use Sekem to create magical items called vestiges. Mummies have interesting interactions with other immortals. Most immortals have a very raw deal when it comes to their powers. While free from dying of old age, they can still be killed, or maybe their way of staving off death is dehumanizing. However, many are envious of the mummy's immortality. When a mummy dies, they come back and they have access to amazing powers. It's no wonder why immortals will become rivals or allies to the Arisen. There are four main types of immortals in the Mummy rulebook: blood bathers, who will bathe in the blood of the living to revitalize themselves; body thieves, who will possess people with younger bodies; the Eternals, who are immortals who die when the relic they are linked to is destroyed. Think the portrait of Dorian Gray. That's basically it. The Reborn, who are reincarnated upon death with their memories returning to them after being reborn. Other immortals include the Patchwork People, who pay mad scientists to keep them alive; Purified, whose consciousness returns to the Shadow Realm upon death; and Visitors, who are parasitic entities that latch onto human brains. Chris Allen even posted on the Onyx Path forum a free immortal called the Nameless, who loses parts of their memory when they die. First things first, determine if all your players are playing mummies or if some will be playing cultists. Mummy is pretty friendly to being cross-game compatible with immortals like vampires, who could easily exist across multiple mummy descents. If other players are playing cultists, though, it means they are pretty weak and not able to follow a mummy to another time period, unless they are a Sadiq or an immortal. Even then, they experience time in a straight line instead of how mummies do. I highly recommend everyone playing as a merit of mummies or all cultists if it's an introductory game. Unlike other splats, mummies can't establish identities in society on their own. That being said, their cultists can do that for them by creating fake identities that the mummy can take on when they awaken. For instance, maybe the cultist doctors co-sign papers with a doctor who doesn't exist in order for the mummy to take on that persona. Or maybe the cultists establish a reclusive billionaire persona for the mummy so that they can take control of the cult's corporation when they return. A game of Mummy is on a timer, unless the storyteller plans for the chronicle to take place over multiple awakenings. Time travel is a big part of Mummy, and you can wind up failing your first awakening only to arise a year later when your failure snowballs into an even bigger issue to deal with. Time travel is hard to write, even without having to deal with players going off the rails. A key piece of advice is to take detailed notes of what your players do to affect the world, and see if you can bring those elements back when you travel into the future or the past. Such as maybe killing someone in the past only for their great-grandson to become a mummy hunter. Or perhaps discovering that the villain in the future became evil because of something the players did several sessions later when they traveled to the past. If I were to run Mummy, I'd have my players create a merit of mummies and have each of them establish one descent where they had a bonding moment with another player. This will establish the group as loyal to each other. Since Mummy involves time travel, I'd plan at least 3 time periods where the chronicle could go if I want, and adjust them depending on the story. I'd love to switch between the 1920s, modern day, and Revolutionary War era if I can, mainly because I have some knowledge of those time periods. I'd like to escalate the story between these 3 time periods, with the first one being low stakes but the next one upping the difficulty. In the first scenario, the players would be trying to recover a stolen relic from a sorcerer and their cultists who plan to use it to create a vestige. Once the players either recover, destroy, or let the sorcerer use it, they'll shift to a new time period. This would be dependent on what happened. Maybe if they destroyed the relic, the Sekem created an Amkata, which in the future has been enthralling people to serve it. Maybe if it was used to create a vestige, the Arisen have to stop it from being used in an assassination. Or if they recover it, maybe they go back in time prior to when it was stolen in the first place and have to get it to the location from where it will be stolen from. Time travel is a tricky thing, and mummy memory loss tends to lend itself to dramatic irony. That is to say, the characters don't know what's going on, but the players do. You'll have to use your own judgment on this because some players may not like having to roleplay a character that doesn't know what's going on while they as players do, such as having a recurring villain pretending to be a loyal servant when the mummy first awakens. The players have fought this villain multiple times, but to the mummies, this is the first time they've met them. Why would they suspect they're a villain? If you want to check out some actual plays, I highly suggest watching the Mummy the Curse actual play that they did for the Onyx Path virtual conference or convention. It was really great and it did well in establishing what mummies were prior to the Rite of Return. There will be a link in the description. Additionally, Matthew Dawkins, who is one of the developers on Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition, ran a game for the Red Moon role-playing group in their actual play, and I highly recommend checking it out, but I will say it's not for everyone, as it's done in a more theatrical radio play drama style instead of a normal game style. I'll explain this picture in a second, but first let me tell you a little secret about YouTube's algorithm. If you watch this video all the way through to the end, even if you walk away to go to the bathroom, YouTube will be more likely to recommend this video, which means more people will find out about Mummy the Curse and possibly be interested in playing it. And if you thumbs up the video, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications, even more people will see videos like these and really help grow the community. Mummy the Curse is a great looking game, but it's still a very niche game in a niche hobby. You don't have to send money, but if you want, you can send a tip to my Ko-fi account via PayPal, link in the description below. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has helped you get a better understanding of Mummy the Curse. So back in 1997, there was a TV show called Mummies Alive, and I only knew about it because it was on there was an ad on a VHS copy of the Three Ninjas for it. At least I think it was the Three Ninjas. And it was like, oh, Mummies Alive. And so it played really early on Saturdays or during the weekdays on none of the actual like prime cartoon time shows. So it wasn't on Fox, it wasn't on WB, I think it was on UPN or something. And it was very fun to watch. Was about a kid who was actually a reincarnation of a pharaoh, and these mummies came alive to protect him from another mummy who was basically Imhotep and was going to steal the pharaoh's life force to become the next pharaoh, even though we don't have pharaohs anymore. It was a very weird show, and it only ran for one season, but 47 episodes, so please check it out if you want. It actually seems to have inspired some of the components of Mummy the Curse, which is very weird. Anyway. At some point, I want to cover what vampires was. Yes, that's an N, not an M. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.